The sun was beginning to set, casting a warm, golden hue over the quiet suburban neighborhood. The air smelled of fresh grass, and a gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the trees lining the streets. For most of the families who lived in this prestigious area, life had a predictable rhythm: morning jogs, neighborhood barbecues, and Sunday brunches. Everything felt safe, calm, and a little too perfect. For the Johnsons, though, this new chapter was a mix of excitement and uncertainty. Moving to a new town wasn't easy, especially when you were starting fresh, but after years of hard work and determination, Marcus Johnson had finally reached a milestone he had dreamed of for years: becoming the chief of police. And now, after moving his family to a new neighborhood, he was ready to embrace this next stage of his life. Marcus's wife, Naomi, stood at the front door of their new home, smiling as she watched their two children, Zoe and Elijah, play in the yard. The house was spacious and modern, with a beautiful backyard that stretched out, perfect for the kind of family gatherings they had longed for. Naomi felt proud, though a little nervous about their new life. They had spent years in a much more diverse city, and though she hoped their new community would be open and welcoming, there were always lingering questions in her mind. "This place is perfect," Naomi said, glancing over at Marcus, who was setting up the grill for their first neighborhood barbecue. "Yeah, it's a fresh start," Marcus replied, nodding, though there was a hint of unease in his voice. He was excited, but he knew that being the new police chief in a predominantly white suburb could have its challenges. As a black man, he had always strived to break barriers, but that didn't mean he didn't face prejudice along the way. Later that afternoon, Naomi decided to take a walk around the neighborhood to meet some of the neighbors. The houses were large and well kept, and she noticed the occasional wave or nod from people who were out in their yards. It seemed like a welcoming place, but Naomi couldn't shake the feeling that some eyes were watching her, sizing her up. As Naomi walked back toward their house, she saw a woman standing in her front yard, her arms crossed, glaring in her direction. The woman was older, with short, bleached blonde hair and a sharp expression that seemed out of place in such a tranquil setting. "Excuse me," Naomi said politely, stopping to introduce herself. "I'm Naomi Johnson. We just moved in next door." The woman's eyes narrowed, and she gave a curt nod. "Martha Wills, you folks are having a barbecue, I see. Well, I hope you know this neighborhood doesn't appreciate too much noise, and I don't think your music's really appropriate." Naomi smiled, trying to maintain the peace. "Oh, we're just getting started. It's our first evening here, just a small gathering. It won't get too loud." Martha sniffed, clearly unimpressed. "Just saying, some people don't like to be disturbed, and we don't usually entertain that kind of crowd around here." Naomi's smile faltered, but she quickly regained her composure. "Thanks for the heads up. We'll keep it in mind," she said before quickly walking back to the house. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the Johnsons' backyard came alive. The smell of smoky barbecue ribs filled the air, blending with the sound of upbeat music playing from a Bluetooth speaker. A small group of friends and colleagues had gathered to celebrate the family's move and Marcus's new role. Laughter echoed through the yard as Zoe and Elijah raced each other around the lawn, their joy infectious. Naomi mingled with the guests, balancing a tray of drinks. She felt at ease now, her earlier encounter with Martha Wills almost forgotten. Almost. Every so often, she glanced toward the fence separating their yards, half expecting the woman to appear and scowl at the celebration. Marcus, standing at the grill, kept a watchful eye on the gathering. As much as he wanted to enjoy the moment, years of experience had taught him to stay alert, even in the safest-looking neighborhoods. "Dad, come try my secret sauce," Elijah called, holding up a plate of wings he doused in his experimental concoction. "Secret? Ooh, let's see what you've got," Marcus said, chuckling as he took a bite. His exaggerated wince drew a burst of laughter from everyone nearby. "You'll get better, kid," Marcus teased, ruffling his son's hair. But the warmth of the evening was interrupted by an all-too-familiar sound, the wail of a police siren approaching from down the street. Conversations hushed, and heads turned toward the flashing blue and red lights that lit up the neighborhood. "Is someone in trouble?" Naomi murmured, setting her tray down. The patrol car rolled to a stop in front of the Johnsons' house, and two officers stepped out. They looked around the yard, their expressions a mix of confusion and professionalism. Behind them, Martha Wills stood at the edge of her driveway, arms crossed and lips pursed in smug satisfaction. Marcus's jaw tightened, but he took a deep breath, stepping forward as one of the officers approached. "Good evening, officers," "How can I help you?" he asked, his tone calm but firm. The lead officer, a young man with a crisp uniform and a wary expression, glanced at a notepad in his hand. "We received a noise complaint from a neighbor. Said there was loud music and a possible disturbance." "Disturbance?" Marcus repeated, his voice tinged with incredulity. He gestured toward the gathering behind him. "As you can see, it's just a small barbecue, family and a few friends, nothing out of the ordinary." The officer hesitated, clearly trying to assess the situation. "We have to respond to all complaints, sir." From her yard, Martha called out, "It's not just the noise. I smelled something suspicious earlier. Maybe you should check if they're drinking or doing anything illegal." Naomi's jaw dropped, and a few guests exchanged shocked looks. Marcus turned to face Martha, his expression a mask of restraint. "Martha, we've done nothing wrong. This is a neighborhood barbecue, nothing more." Martha shrugged, her voice dripping with disdain. "Well, some of us prefer to keep our neighborhood quiet and safe." The tension in the air was palpable. Marcus turned back to the officers, his voice steady. "Gentlemen, I suggest you take a closer look at the situation. You might find something enlightening." The younger officer frowned, glancing between Marcus and Martha. "Sir, may I ask for your name?" Marcus allowed a small, knowing smile to cross his face. "Marcus Johnson, Chief of Police for this district." The silence that followed was almost comical. The lead officer's eyes widened slightly, and his partner shifted uncomfortably. Martha's smug expression vanished in an instant. "Chief Johnson, I didn't realize," the officer stammered. "I'm sure you didn't," Marcus replied, his voice cool. "But now that you do, perhaps you'll see there's no need to waste time on baseless complaints." The officers exchanged glances, clearly embarrassed. "Of course, Chief, we apologize for the inconvenience. We'll make a note of the situation and inform dispatch that there's no issue here." As the officers returned to their car, Martha sputtered, her face red with frustration. "This isn't over," she shouted, retreating to her house. Marcus sighed, turning back to his guests. "Sorry about that. Everyone, let's get back to the party." The mood slowly lightened again, but Naomi pulled Marcus aside, her voice low. "Do you think this is going to keep happening?" "It might," he admitted, "but if it does, we'll handle it, together." Naomi nodded, determination in her eyes. The night continued, but the encounter left a mark, a reminder of the challenges they might face in their new home. The next morning, the Johnsons tried to move on from the unpleasantness of the previous night. Marcus left early for his first official day at the station, determined to focus on his duties, while Naomi stayed home to unpack the last of the boxes and settle the kids into their new routine. But the echoes of Martha Will's hostility lingered like an unwelcome guest. Naomi couldn't shake the image of the woman's smug face as she shouted across the yard. What struck her most wasn't just the malice, it was the confidence, the assumption that her complaint would carry weight simply because it came from her. Mid-morning, Naomi decided to go for a walk, partly to clear her mind and partly to get a better sense of the neighborhood. As she strolled past neatly manicured lawns and flower beds, she noticed several neighbors outside, chatting or tending to their yards. Most offered polite smiles or waves, but there were a few who avoided her gaze altogether. "Good morning," a cheerful voice called out, breaking through Naomi's thoughts. Naomi turned to see a woman in her late 30s approaching her from across the street. She had a warm smile and a friendly energy that was hard to resist. "Hi there," Naomi replied, returning the smile. "I'm Laura Harris," the woman said, extending a hand. "I live just 2 houses down from you. Welcome to the neighborhood." "Thank you. I'm Naomi Johnson." She shook Laura's hand, relieved to meet someone who seemed genuinely kind. "I heard about the barbecue last night," Laura continued, her tone cautious. "And well, about Martha. Don't let her get to you. She's been like that for years." Naomi hesitated, unsure how much to share. "I appreciate that. It's just frustrating. You know, we're just trying to settle in. And you don't have to explain," Laura interrupted gently. "People like Martha thrive on making others feel unwelcome, but not everyone here is like her. There are plenty of good folks in this neighborhood, and I'd like to think I'm one of them." Naomi felt a flicker of hope. "It's good to know not everyone's against us." Laura nodded. "If you ever need anything, just let me know. And don't worry about Martha. Most of us just ignore her." As Naomi continued her walk, her spirits lifted slightly, but her relief was short-lived. When she returned home, she found Zoe sitting on the porch steps, looking upset. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" Naomi asked, kneeling beside her daughter. Zoe hesitated, then blurted out, "Some kids at the park wouldn't let me play with them. They said I don't belong here." Naomi's heart sank. "Who said that to you?" "I don't know their names," Zoe mumbled, tears welling in her eyes. "They just kept saying it over and over." Naomi hugged her daughter tightly, fighting back her own tears. She wanted to shield her children from the ugliness of the world, but it seemed that prejudice had already found its way into their lives. Later that evening, when Marcus returned home, Naomi shared what had happened. His jaw clenched as she recounted Zoe's experience, and she could see the frustration and pain in his eyes. "I knew there'd be challenges," Marcus said, pacing the living room, "but I didn't think it would hit this fast, or this hard." "We have to do something," Naomi insisted. "We can't just let them treat us like this." Marcus nodded, his mind racing. "We'll start by building connections, showing people who we really are. If we want to change how they see us, we have to show them the truth." But as the days passed, the hostility continued. Subtle comments, cold stares, and whispered conversations followed the Johnsons wherever they went. Even at the station, Marcus noticed a few officers who seemed less than thrilled to have him as their chief. One evening, as Marcus sat in his home office, he found himself reflecting on the path that had brought him here. He thought about his childhood, growing up in a working-class neighborhood where opportunities were scarce. He remembered the long hours he'd spent studying, working 2 jobs to pay for college, and the countless times he'd had to prove himself in a system that often doubted his abilities. But what stuck with him most were the moments of blatant discrimination he had faced. The time a superior officer had questioned whether he was really qualified for a promotion. The time he was pulled over in his own neighborhood because he didn't look like he belonged. Each of those experiences had left scars, some visible, others buried deep, but they had also fueled his determination to rise above the prejudice and prove his worth. Now, as the chief of police, Marcus knew he had a unique opportunity to create change, but he also knew it wouldn't be easy. "We'll take it one step at a time," he said aloud, more to himself than anyone else. When he rejoined his family in the living room, he found Naomi and the kids watching a movie. He sat down beside them, wrapping an arm around Naomi's shoulders. "We're going to get through this," he promised, "together." The Johnsons had endured their fair share of challenges in their short time in the neighborhood, but Marcus was determined to make a stand, not through anger or confrontation, but through example. He wanted to show his neighbors that they weren't just outsiders but a family with a right to live in peace, just like anyone else. A week after the barbecue incident, Marcus and Naomi decided to organize a community event in the park. It was a bold move, considering the tension, but they believed in the power of connection. They called it a unity picnic, inviting neighbors, community leaders, and local organizations to come together for food, games, and open conversation. The morning of the event, Naomi busied herself setting up tables while Marcus coordinated with volunteers. Zoe and Elijah helped arrange balloons and signs, their excitement contagious. Despite the work, an undercurrent of anxiety ran through the family. What if no one showed up? But as the clock struck noon, people began trickling in. Some were curious, others were hesitant, their skepticism visible. Marcus and Naomi greeted each guest with warmth, offering plates of food and engaging in conversation. To their surprise, Laura Harris arrived early, bringing her husband and 2 young kids. "This is a great idea," Laura said, smiling. "We need more of this around here." Her presence seemed to encourage others to join in. Slowly but surely, more families arrived, and the park came alive with laughter and chatter. Children played games on the lawn, while adults mingled and shared stories. Even some of Marcus's officers showed up, mingling in uniform, a subtle but powerful symbol of solidarity. But one person's absence loomed large: Martha Wills. Naomi had seen her peering out from behind her curtains earlier that morning, but the older woman hadn't set foot outside. Halfway through the event, Marcus took the microphone to address the crowd. "Thank you all for coming today," he began, his voice steady but heartfelt. "When my family and I moved here, we hoped to find a community where we could belong, and while our start hasn't been perfect, today gives me hope. Hope that we can build bridges, learn from each other, and create a neighborhood we can all be proud of." The crowd applauded, and Marcus continued, "I know that change isn't easy. It takes time, patience, and effort, but I believe we can do it, together." As the applause died down, Naomi noticed a figure standing at the edge of the park. It was Martha, her expression unreadable. Naomi hesitated, then made a decision. She approached Martha slowly, a plate of food in her hands. "Hi, Martha," she said, her tone polite but firm. "I thought you might be hungry." Martha glanced at the plate, then at Naomi. For a moment, she said nothing, but then she sighed, her shoulders slumping slightly. "I wasn't going to come," she admitted, "didn't think it'd be my kind of thing." "Well, you're here now," Naomi replied, offering a small smile. Martha took the plate reluctantly, her gaze softening. "You've got guts, I'll give you that." Naomi nodded. "I guess I had to, moving here, but I think you'll find we're not so different. Martha, we both want a safe, happy community. Maybe we can start there." The older woman didn't respond immediately, but as Naomi walked back to join her family, she noticed Martha lingering a little longer, watching the festivities. By the end of the afternoon, the Unity picnic had surpassed the Johnsons' expectations. Connections were made, barriers began to crack, and even skeptics seemed to walk away with a slightly different perspective. That night, as Marcus and Naomi tucked Zoe and Elijah into bed, they felt a renewed sense of hope. The challenges hadn't disappeared, but they had taken the first step in breaking the cycle of prejudice. "This is just the beginning," Marcus said, taking Naomi's hand as they sat on the porch. "And we'll keep going," Naomi replied, her voice filled with determination. As they watched the stars above, the Johnsons knew their journey wasn't over, but they also knew they had the strength to face whatever came next, together. The end.